I'm Dwayne Hulbert, and welcome to Learn and Love Music once again. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about scales and arpeggios. These are all things that are important in developing technique on the piano. When I first started teaching at the college level, I always thought it was more important to just study the pieces. But then I realized if students don't have the foundation with their technique in scales and arpeggios, it doesn't help them when they start to learn difficult pieces that incorporate these scales and arpeggios. So we're going to look at different ways we can work on technique, how to use the hands, how to use the arms, all of that. Also want to remind all of you, please subscribe to this channel. It's really important and it means something to me, and it doesn't cost you anything. So let's get started with scales and arpeggios today. So, are scales and arpeggios important? Yes, they are. And it's important that we have a good source for scales and arpeggios. I like to use the Hannon book, the Hannon exercises. It has all of your scales and exercises. All of you can do them in octaves, which is this, or in thirds, or sixths. Lots of different ways. All of your fingerings are included in those books. It's a good book for teaching. So here are some things that we need to keep in mind when we play scales and arpeggios. We want to make sure that your hands are level as you go up and down the keyboard. Now, one of the things that I've done with working with scales is that, yes, the hands are level, but I also think that there can be a little bit of variation in your hands. And for a while I used to play the violin, and I always had to learn what up bow and down bow are. And on the violin, down bow is doing this, and up bow is doing this. So if I did it with my left hand, it would be more like a down bow, up bow, down bow, up bow. But I find that to be helpful when I'm doing scales, because you can have a different path going up than coming down. So if you have C major, higher going down, I find that easier just to negotiate the shape of the passage rather than just having the fingers stable or locked in place. Also, we all know that it's important to have our fingertips curved. There's different types of curved fingers that teachers give, and one of the ones that I've seen before is where the fingers are kind of like holding a ball. The old, I think it was John Shom used to say, hold an orange, or something like that. Well, that doesn't quite work because the fingertips are not firmly on the keys. So I prefer, rather than holding a ball or an orange, to keeping the hand, the top of the hand flat like a table, be like this, and the fingertips curved just at the tip, and the pads of the fingertips need to be firmly in the keys, so there's lots of support in the fingers, and the wrist should be neutral. We shouldn't have the wrist going up or down or around, and we don't want these knuckles to be sticking up. We want to have this nice and level. So, and the other thing we want to talk about is the thumb. A lot of times I've seen people, when they teach the thumb, they always have the thumb kind of like this, but the thumb doesn't work that way. The thumb is a shorter finger, and so you'll see what I'm doing here is I put the fingers forward and the thumb back. So when I play the thumb works from this angle, it's almost like a couple of inches behind the second finger to the thumb. That's also much more efficient than doing this. It's a little more clumsy to do that. So always keep that in mind. And speaking of thumb, we need to talk a little bit about how to use the thumb. My teacher used to ask me, where is the end of the thumb? Well, the thumb starts here, and I would say the thumb ends there, but I was wrong. She said that thumb actually ends way back here underneath the hand, right here. So when you use the thumb, this large area of muscle right here has to actually move along with the thumb, so that we have a lot of agility with the thumb and speed. So when you do crossings, everything moves very smoothly and quickly, and we don't have that that kind of push forward that makes it a little bit awkward. So, and when you play scales, you have to use the inside part of the keys. You'll note that there are a lot of places between the two black keys it's really skinny in here, and between the E and the F it's kind of skinny in there. And you can't just weave in and out of the black keys and white keys in order to play scales. A lot of students will say, well, my finger is too fat. In all my years of teaching, I've only had one student that fingers were too thick to actually play these middle fingers in here cleanly, the E and F, and the G and the A and the C, these notes in here. So make sure that you get used to having your fingers stretched out so they use the inside part of the keys, especially when you're crossing. You want to make sure that you're not crossing around, you're crossing over the keys. So we've got the thumbs lined up, we've got the fingers lined up, and one other thing I want to talk about is the fifth finger, because a lot of times I find that students, even when they're doing something like arpeggios, they always kind of spread the fifth finger out like this. I prefer to have the fifth finger lined up perfectly with the key like this, rather than kind of angled out. This is not a very efficient way to use the fifth finger. So we only use the fifth finger in arpeggios and scales at the top note anyway, but we definitely don't want to be having that kind of stretched out. So let's go through some scales. And as you watch, I want you to watch the you're going to see a lot of the action of the thumb. Make sure you watch the thumb is back, the top of the hand is level. And the other thing I do in order to increase speed is I'll have students put on a metronome and then do slow scales in quarters, and then faster eighth notes for 2 octaves, triplets for 3 octaves, and sixteenths for 4 octaves. So let's just I'm going to do a C major scale, so watch the technique, and I'll do it in that way, 1, 2, 3, and 4 octaves. And I forgot to mention one other thing. I think we talked about this before. We don't want to be pumping the elbows back and forth. In C major particularly, we're not, as you watch my arms go down, the elbows just move straight across. We don't do a lot of this kind of stuff. Really keep those elbows stationary. All they're doing is just guiding the hand down or up, whichever way we're going. Once again, I like to think of the violin. You know, in a violin, this is a down bow, this is an up bow. So you have that kind of a smooth line of the elbows. This is really important. Let's also talk a little bit about arpeggios. Arpeggios are important in making sure that we can move very smoothly, whether we're playing in all white keys as we would in, let's say, G major. We can do the same thing we did with scales. Really smooth lines, and also the elbows move across. And not to forget, when you play arpeggios and scales, we don't want to do something like this with your body, do that kind of thing. So your hips, as you're sitting at the piano, as you're going up, notice when I get to the top, my side of my body is over on this side is lifted up, so that their shoulders and arms are level, going down. And as we go down to the bottom, we move so this way and that way. Okay, we're not going to be moving this way and that way. Everything stays level and smooth. So it's important. With arpeggios too, you have to make sure that you work on crossing technique. And what that means, use the inside part of the keys, lift the finger up and glide across. Lift the finger up, glide across. No twisting and no letting go. You gotta hang on until you get almost crossing over. Notice when I come down, I don't go around like this, I go over the top. And sometimes, as you heard, I miss that key. You can do exercises for finding the middle part of the key on arpeggios by doing something like this. Or going up. Or going down. That's a good exercise for aiming to hit the crossings cleanly. So the other thing with fingering, a lot of times the scale books will tell you to use the third finger for the C major, for example, the E. I have a bigger hand, and I actually prefer using the fourth finger. But either one works. And same thing with. Now, we don't use the fourth finger in the right hand, though. The right hand is always 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay? And of course, all of you know that if you have to use the black keys, you have to follow. You can't be doing stuff like that. You have to use the thumb always has the white key. So if you play A flat major, C, 2, 4. There are a couple keys, though, that are really tough for arpeggios, and those are the ones that have all black keys. For example, F sharp major or G flat major. You have to stay way inside so that these fingers are almost up against the board here. If you have a look at my piano here, it's all scratched up because my fingers are really up close to this. Arpeggios with black keys are really hard. You hardly ever use them, but I find that because the keys are narrow, it's a little harder to be accurate. So you can do exercises. You can do something like this. I call it target practice, so you can make sure that you can be really clean on those black keys. And once again, anytime you're using scales and arpeggios, remember, don't pump the arms. The arms always stay very smooth across, whether you're doing scales. Scales or arpeggios, always use the inside part of the keys. Keep your thumb back, fingers slightly curved at the tips, and have that nice space between the thumb and the fingers. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of talking about technique for the piano. And as we go on from week to week, I will talk a little bit about the importance of how technique is applied to pieces, and we might even mention something about arpeggio technique in pieces. But I hope this has been helpful for you so that you can learn how to use arpeggios and scales as part of your regimen in practicing every day.